Morning, everybody. Give me just a second, we'll get going. Okay, welcome back. It's 10 a.m. East Coast time after a summer thunder shower here in West Michigan, which is much needed. I'm out on my porch. It's probably a little echoey, but I wanted to change the pace. Yeah, welcome to our weekly C3 live teaching. And if you're new to C3, check us out online, c3westmichigan.org. You can sign up for our newsletter, keeps you informed. Those of you who are a part of this community, read the newsletter. There's all kinds of good stuff in there. And I'll be teaching for the next 20 minutes or so, maybe 30. And then we'll hand it over to our local musician. I think it's Danica and the Jeb. Yep, that's this week. Really excited to have local musicians who join us every week. So hang on to the C3 page, like the C3 page, and then you can join our musicians live. It's very important to support our local musicians, not only because they need our support, but we need their support in terms of poetry, song, and meaning. That's what we're seeking right now. And yeah, so this week, maybe that's enough of an intro. This week, I want to do part 2. And hi, Instagram people. Hey, Ryan. Oh, I miss my friend Ryan Meeks very much. It's good to see you. In any case, I'm doing part 2, what I'm calling the sign of Jonah. And I think it's going to be a 3-part series. Next week at C3, we're actually going to have a guest, so that's going to be amazing. Check the website for details. Check the newsletter for details. The sign of Jonah. So this line, first of all, if you remember last week, this line comes from Jesus. So some people come to him and they say, "Teacher, give us a sign." And I think in part they're asking for maybe a little magic dust, like prove to us, do a little magic show for us, and then we'll really listen to what you're saying. Prove yourself, which is interesting because you'd think if Jesus had some sort of divine powers or something, he would, do a little trick and boom, instant followers. He'd be followed on Instagram, all kinds of people clamoring. He'd be an influencer. Jesus as influencer. But what's interesting about Jesus is he doesn't play that sort of game as far as we know. And in fact, when he does any sort of healing, he says, don't tell anybody. So he's not playing the influencer game. And in any case, he says, no sign will be given to you except the sign of Jonah. No sign will be given to you except the sign of Jonah. Just as Jonah spent 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of a fish, so the Son of Man, or humanity is what that means in Hebrew, the Son of Humanity will spend 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. Now, Jesus is known for enigmatic, mysterious, provocative, koan-like teachings, and this is one of them. It's hard to know what he's speaking about because he's speaking in symbol, in image, in archetypal imagery. He's not speaking in Western scientific, language, rational. He's not speaking in terms of trying to prove something or even in a sense of prediction. Like you might hear, oh, 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. He's just predicting his own death and resurrection, which he is and he isn't, we might say. He isn't in the sense of he's pointing to the fundamental symbol of the kind of movement that he was about, the fundamental symbol. And what's the fundamental symbol? Death and resurrection, or death and rebirth, or life, death, rebirth. The big cycle of change and transformation. He says that's the sign. But more than that, he's not saying this is a sign that I'm showing you about myself. He's saying if you want a sign, you must go through this very archetypal symbol. To be short, if you want to know what I'm about, you have to go into the belly of the fish. That's what he's saying. If you want to use contemporary language, you must die. Your ego must be buried. Your ego must be swallowed by a fish. You must be taken to the underworld if you want to change, if you want to transform. The old container for that was the container of initiation. Initiation rites or rites of passage were a symbolic way of helping young people pass through this kind of symbol from their adolescent, egoic point of view down into the underworld to experience the mysteries of existence and out onto the other side to serve the community. That's the great descent and return. That's what Joseph Campbell's talking about. That's what Jesus is talking about. That's what Buddha is talking about. And you fill in the blanks. You can find this connection all over the place. This is what Clarissa Pinkola Estates is talking about with life, death, life cycle for the women's journey. So this isn't a masculine, feminine thing. It's both. So, why am I talking about this? Because this is the content of my new book, if my new book ever comes out, which I hope it does. I've been working hard on a new book, and the pattern here, the sign of Jonah, I don't know if that'll be the title of the book. That's already used by Thomas Merton. He has a book called The Sign of Jonas, talking about similar things, but from his own point of view. So this has been on my mind. And so let me review the pattern here. The great pattern, the sign of Jonah, contains these elements: calling, which is like a beckoning, an alluring, an alluring, mysterious pulling. That's calling. And calling, it's not like a phone call from God, or you get an email that says something like, hey man, you need to become a lawyer. No, that's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about that kind of alluring, change your life. Something is not right. Something could be deeper. That's calling. Calling followed by severance, which is exactly what it sounds like: a severing, a cutting off of your old way of being, and you're launched into the unknown. Oftentimes this is not a choice. You don't wake up in the morning and say, everything I think I've known about myself and the world, I'd like to just walk out on. No, I don't think so. Severance can come in a variety of forms. Listen to last week's teaching, but often not chosen. You're thrown overboard in the Jonah story. That's severance. And you're not going back. You can't swim back to shore. That is followed by descent, and that's what I want to pick up on this week. So calling, severance, descent, which is a kind of unraveling, a descending, a sinking in the story, followed by the underworld, which is being swallowed by the fish, being swallowed by the mysteries. This is Persephone once she reaches Hades, down in the lower reaches of the soul, of the mysteries of the mystery of psyche itself and nature and the cosmos. That's the underworld. And then that's followed by a kind of return, which I like to call vox, which I mean voice, like in Latin, vocation. I'm not talking about career. I'm talking about really, really using your voice in the world. And that has to be embodied. It's not given. It's not a given that you'll even do such a thing. That is the great invitation. after descent and return, after death and resurrection. So calling, severance, descent, underworld, and vocation. And this is all in the Jonah story. This is the sign of Jonah. This is the pattern. So to review the story, if you don't know the Bible, you don't really need to. And a summary of the story might be in order, but you might find it interesting just to read it, just for old time's sake. And I find, actually, personally, I've had all kinds of hang-ups with the Bible. It's like an old girlfriend. I break up and get back together again, and break up and get back together again. Right now, I'm back together again. And I'm finding, maybe I'm in a new stage of life, which I think I am, that the stories are way more provocative and interesting on the symbolic level than I ever thought. And actually, they're in the collective unconscious, and then they're in the Western imagination and in the Western unconscious, so they're worth probing. They're operating whether we give them attention or not, for good and ill. In any case, here's a review of the story. So, in the story, Jonah is called, and he doesn't want to go. He runs, he flees, which is, Joseph Campbell says, is often part of the journey. That's the refusal of the call. But as you know, with all great stories, just because you run doesn't mean you're not going to get caught. And instead he gets caught up in a storm and thrown overboard. And that's the severance. So calling, severance, followed by a kind of sinking, a descending. And he's sinking into the darkness, into the ocean, into the abyss, into death itself. And down somewhere in the abyss, it says, God, the mystery, we could say, sends a fish. And he's swallowed up by this being, by this great being. And in other words, he's swallowed by the forces and energies and mysteries that are larger than his own. And the ancient word for that was beast, fish, the dragon, if you will. He's swallowed, and he's housed inside the belly of this mysterious being for 3 days. The amount of time it takes the body to begin to smell and rot, which is happening to his own ego, his own perspective, his own worldview, if you will. And in this being, he begins to sing a new song, begins to discover a new song, and that's actually in the book. He's suddenly a poet, and that's part of the underworld journey. And then, by no choice of his own, just like being swallowed was no choice of his own, he's spit out onto a shore. And the shore is not a shore he's ever been to. And that's probably a little clue about the nature of real transformation. You end up on a shore you've never been to. And that's what makes it so scary, in a sense. Because the great archetypal pattern of transformation means you're on a new shore. And really, really, most of us don't want to be on a new shore. And that's one reason why I'm talking about this story right now, because COVID is a transpersonal, transcultural, transreligious, universal descent and return. There's calling, there's severance, there's descent. We'll find out if there's underworld. We'll find out if there's any kind of new calling. But we can't go back to normal. There is no normal. That's what the climate crisis has been screaming about for the 50 years that we've been conscious of it. There is no going back. It's being spit onto a new shore. And once on the new shore, again, there aren't exactly guarantees. The calling on Jonah is to now go and live into this new way of being and see what happens. And the very end of the story, which I want to do week 3 of this. So in a couple weeks, I'm going to do part 3 of the sign of Jonah. It's unbelievable. If you've never read the book of Jonah, you'll be like, I cannot believe this is in the Bible. It's amazing. He goes to the city of Nineveh where he was resistant to going, but it's not exactly good news. He becomes angry and bitter, and a mysterious plant called Kikayon grows and gives him shade, and he's mad at God. It's awesome. And the book of Jonah ends with a question. The only book in the Bible that ends with a question directly. Probably all books end with a kind of existential question. But anyway, I want to hold off on that. And again, that's why I'm talking about it in terms of COVID. What is what are we being severed from? What is the path of descent like for us right now? What's the path of descent like for you? What are the gifts and trappings along the way? That sort of thing. So again, review last week's teaching if you want. That was calling and severance. So today I want to pick up on descent. And I might start off with a statement that's kind of general. And the statement is this: Western culture, particularly American Western consumerism, wants nothing to do with the path of descent. So I need to say that right at the beginning in case we're under any illusions that this is easy, or that the culture supports us, or that we have elders that support us. We don't. We barely do. Or we have elders and they're hidden in the background somewhere, you could say. My friend Jonathan is always saying I never wave at him, so I'm waving. So what's my point? My point is Western culture does not support the path of descent. What's an example of that? Plastic surgery. And plastic surgery as a metaphor. I'm not against it, by the way. If you've ever had it, I'm not shaming you. But I'm saying, or to quote a Native American phrase, no wise person ever wanted to be younger. So we resist the path of descent. Western culture resists the path of descent because the ego, who we think we are, our adolescent selves, we want to preserve forever, you know. Cryogenics, is that what it's called? Where you like freeze the body? I want to freeze this thing forever and ever. That's not the cycle of nature. It's death and rebirth. It's descent. So it's worth just saying our culture does not support descent. And in fact, listen to the language of politics, particularly with Donald Trump, but Donald Trump as a metaphor for both parties, that it's all about winning, 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 being number one, number one. I'm going to win, I'm going to charge, I'm going to be victorious. Everybody else is going to be a loser, and I don't like losers. That is adolescent, junior high, uninitiated ego consciousness. And that's the thing that's being stripped out, ripped out. That's the path of descent. No wonder we resist it. No wonder sometimes it takes a diagnosis from the doctor, or an unexpected illness, or the death of someone you love. No wonder it takes, at times, not that I'm a fan of these things, but that kind of disruption, or a global pandemic. And then suddenly our own impermanence and mortality is ever present. We can't escape. Are you tracking with what I'm saying? Are you hearing what I'm saying? I hope so. So the path of descent. So I just want to outline some things. And again, I'm using metaphors and symbols. So treat them as such. Don't treat them rigidly. We're out of practice using the language of the soul, which is the language of imagery and metaphors. So what's the path of descent like? It's like sinking. It's like unraveling. That's a metaphor that I use strongly in my book, Bitten by a Camel, because that's what I felt like. My life was unraveling. My worldview was unraveling. My theology was unraveling. My roles, father, pastor, teacher, evangelical, these are all roles, were like coming apart at the seams. That's what descent feels like. So it's not exactly like, yeah, we're descending. No, it's scary. It's uncomfortable. That's probably the best word. It's uncomfortable. Or unpleasant. I got this from my wife. Her therapist once told her, hey, it's okay to say this is unpleasant. And that has always stuck with me. This is very unpleasant, this unraveling. Old metaphors for it were the Dark Knight. I think St. John of the Cross is talking about descent, when he's talking about the dark night, you have the feeling or the sense that you're not sure where the bottom is. I think 12 steppers know what I'm talking about. Like, where is the bottom? And I don't know. I don't know. It's an abyss. And of course, that's kind of frightening. The big questions start to arise in descent. And what do I mean by the big questions? Well, the big four that spiritualities, mythology were meant to address, to probe. And that's, who am I? Who am I in relation to the cosmos? Who am I in relation to nature? Who am I in relation to other people? Who am I in relation to myself? Particularly, who am I in relation to myself? Those are the big four, so to speak. And that's the path of descent. All these start surfacing and you cannot help it. You cannot help it. And part of you knows, I might say the soul knows, that these are the right kinds of questions. Who am I in relation to nature and the cosmos and others and self? These become pressing in the descent, but you do not have answers. You're just sinking. And what's happening on the level of the ego, it's beginning to die. It's beginning to crack. And again, when I say ego, I just mean my conscious awareness of who I think I am. Ego is not a bad thing. You even have an ego on the other side of descent and return, on the other side of transformation, believe it or not, at least in my view. So, but the adolescent ego is the one that's gripping. And by adolescent, please don't think in terms of age. Especially in American Western culture, adolescence begins at puberty and ends sometimes never. Like, we literally have psychologically, adolescent boys mostly running the world. Think about that. Uninitiated, adolescent boys, psychospiritually running the world. Who would disagree with that? I mean, I don't think anybody would disagree with that. Not in their right mind, not in the quiet moments. Okay, anyway. So what else might I say? Let me say something larger culturally. Because today I'm pretty much only focusing on descent. And again, the pattern is calling, severance, descent, underworld, which I may touch on a little bit, followed by vocation, vox. It's the sign of Jonah. So culturally speaking, like if we take a step back and say, do cultures go through something like this? And I'm suggesting yes, and we're in one. We might be experiencing the dying of American fantasies. The dying of American fantasies. And actually the Black Lives Matter movement, which is now several years old, don't forget that. And I was thinking about that massive mural in DC with painted. There's something like, I think that's profound about the mural on the street, on the road itself, as a kind of symbol. It's saying something like, the fantasy of America is over. And that's destabilizing. It's destabilizing for everybody. I don't care what side you're on, or if you're like Black Lives Matter or All Lives Matter, or whatever these divisions, which in and of themselves are ego-driven, mostly. But the fantasies that we've been carrying about the American story, about how we got here, are being robbed and dismantled, as they should be. And it's totally destabilizing. We don't know where the bottom is. We don't know where the bottom is, which is why people freak out. So what else could we say is happening? Inner self-examination. So what I've been calling for a while is a searching spiritual inventory. And I think in the path of descent, culturally, big picture, and individually, both are happening. Searching spiritual inventory, inner and outer. So examining externally, what are the stories and narratives and fantasies and illusions that we've held so dear? What are they? And might they need some self-examination? Might they need the light of consciousness? Let's stop repeating cliches and examine the very foundations of this thing we call our way of life. That's the external. But that has to happen at the same time as internal examination, in a real descent. So maybe a kind of thin descent is when you're always pointing the finger. Yeah, the narratives are collapsing, and those narratives over there and those people are wrong. That's not really dissent. The gaze has to turn inward. The gaze has to turn inward. And that requires humility, which keeps coming up in everything that we're saying about. And from humus, from earth, it's a self-examination that looks like, oh, I'm not so pretty inside. I'm actually a racist, as much as I blame the culture for its racism. If you're not doing that, that's not dissent. It's really not. If the gaze is not turning inward. Hey, interesting question on Facebook here. Are fantasies the illusions? And maybe she's asking something like, are fantasies and illusions the same thing? Well, perhaps. I probably don't have enough time to try to make some distinction. But maybe fantasies are the story version of illusions. We all have illusions. I'm filled with them. I just don't know what they are. But fantasies are the stories that we build up around the illusions that we have. I think that's at least an offhand answer to the question, but it's a good one. And what's my point? The fantasies and illusions that we're carrying about ourselves and about the world suddenly start to unravel. That's the path of descent. And what can we say about that? Thank God, you know? And if we go back to the story of Jonah, his own illusions and fantasies about his own life, about his own meaning, about his own purpose, about what God wanted, are all being taken in the descent. They're all dying. They're going into the womb and the tomb, which is the same thing. Archetypal. The womb and the tomb. It's the place of death, and the womb, the place where the growth of something new begins to happen. It's the cocoon. Someone brought this back up in our C3 talkback, which follows us at 11 each week, in our discussion group for the C3 people, which you're welcome to join. You have to sign up for our newsletter to get the link. Inside the cocoon, there is a complete dissolving of the caterpillar on the cellular level. You're mush. That's not so fun. Anyway, I hope you're getting the feeling for descent. There's also, interesting, it might sound like, oh, this is all very depressing, and depression can be part of it, and I mean it in a very straightforward way, pressing something down. And the symptomology of that depression are the things worth paying attention to, of course, but what's being depressed ultimately, from a depth psychology point of view, it's the aim of the soul itself. Your real aim, meaning, and purpose is being pushed down, and the pushing down of that creates a whole wellspring of symptoms, we could say. But my main point right here is that it's not just, oh, I'm depressed in the descent. There's also something very alluring and very alive about it. It's because meaning itself is coming to the forefront. It's like, does life mean something or not? And how have I been living my life? And what if I turn my life toward meaning with everything I had? That sort of thing. And that feels alluring. That's beckoning. So descent is frightening and alluring at the same time. It's that paradoxical, I don't want to go any further, and oof, I really would love to go further. Or something about me, or going further seems inevitable, we could say. This is Thomas Merton saying, what does he say? Oh, darkness, I love you more than the day. See? Darkness, I love you more than the day. Or the sweet darkness. That's a line from David White. There's a kind of potency to the descent. And maybe one thing I could say as just to back off for a second, is to say, if you're in a place of descent, and I think our culture is beginning that, though much of it, I might say, is really just severance, and a lot of people trying to deny that that's happening. What can we take comfort in? That this is the way consciousness has changed. This is the way consciousness has changed. Consciousness does not change easily. And there's a kind of comfort to that. Okay, it's like a surrender. You begin to surrender to forces greater than your own ego's capacities to figure things out. Something like that. So it's a kind of gift. Okay. What else can I say here that I haven't already said? I'd like to maybe just end here, because it's already 10:30, by talking about just briefly this transition to the underworld. So it's like there's descent, 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 and then you hit a kind of bottom. And maybe there's something beneath that bottom called the mystery of the abyss. But in the underworld, which is the historic name for it, this is Hades. The underworld is when, like, okay, I died, but I didn't die. The worst thing happened to me, my roles, my fantasies, my ideas, my identity, really, is the simplest way of putting it. The thing I think I am, my Myers-Briggs and my Enneagram number, that too was stripped from me, and suddenly I'm in the underworld phase. And this is the phase where the soul is the most, what could we say, there's a thin veil between myself and the mysteries, between me and the mysteries, between my soul and the mysteries. The veil feels thin. That's a line from Celtic. They talk about thin places and that's the underworld. That's the underworld phase. Dreams and visions and synchronicities and mysteries and allurements, and that's the language of the underworld. So here's an example, just briefly. I'll bring her up when I talk more in depth about the underworld. But Persephone is snatched and taken down to the underworld, down to Hades. By Hades, down to the underworld. And it's terrible. The grief of Demeter, her mother, is terrible. It's ripping the whole fabric of the earth apart. But there she is in the underworld, and interestingly enough, she tastes some pomegranate seeds down in the underworld. She's tasting the sweetness of the mysteries of the underworld, and she'll never be the same. And eventually, if you know the story of Demeter and Persephone, there's a deal struck, and Persephone has to spend half the year in the underworld and half the year in the upper world, in the middle world, in the day world, you could say. Once you've tasted the mysteries, you've tasted the mysteries. You can't go back. You've seen the secrets, so to speak. Now, I know some of you are like, what are we talking about here? You know, especially the rational, scientifically minded. Give me a chance here. Give the stories a chance. Give the myths the chance. Give the symbols the chance. When the ego really unravels, and you're in that underworld place, the world suddenly feels way more mysterious. And something like a commitment to the mysteries of nature, to the mystery of life, to living a meaningful life, bringing that back up into the world, that's Vox, begins to take over. I don't want to end up having only visited this world, says Mary Oliver. That lesson is learned kind of in the underworld. I'll talk about that next time. So let me look here. I think that's probably as much as I want to say today on the pattern of descent. So I'll maybe end with some questions that I had last time. Where are you? Where are you right now? Where are you in this mysterious pattern? Do you have a sense for that? Or if you don't, do you have a sense of where you've been? Do you have a sense of what mysteries are speaking to you right now? Do you have a sense of what from your own worldview being uh, is unraveling? The stories and even fantasies. Maybe if the first time you're saying what you thought was for sure the case is a fantasy. You're like, wait a minute, where are you? And where are we culturally? I wouldn't spend too much time here because this is a major rabbit hole and you could not do any personal work. But what's our culture like right now? And what are the potent opportunities? I really, really see the crisis as an opportunity, the global crisis that we're in. But I'm not exactly sure how. I just say there's an opportunity here. And maybe it's something even like a prayer that's like, give me eyes to see the opportunities right in my own life and in our culture and in the unraveling of our culture and our economy and our religious systems and our systems, period. What's the opportunity? What is the larger mystery really up to here? Just to stay alert to those kinds of questions. What's happening in you, I think, is this. So I want to thank you for being a part of C3. I mean, even the people who are watching right now on Facebook and on Instagram, thanks for being a part of this, for turning your attention every Sunday to some questions, to the larger story, to some self-examination. I'm not asking you to agree with me. That's not how this works. I'm joining you in this pursuit and this quest for meaning and purpose and dignity and human worth and goodness in the world. So I'm with you in that. And thank you for supporting C3, really, for making donations on our website. We couldn't do this. Obviously, Facebook and Instagram are free to you, but it costs us something as an organization. So I want to thank you directly for supporting us, and any gift that you can give through our website or by the other means, I just want to say thank you. So that's it for now. Hang out for the music, and the rest of you I'll see in a little bit at the talk back. Peace.